Welcome everyone. Hello, it's Art here. I am one of the co-founders of Vana, and first of all, the warmest welcome to all of you to Vana Academy. Congratulations on being part of this wonderful community, and obviously special thanks to Muskan and Ayush for putting together such a wonderful program. I'm really excited to be here with all of you. You are pioneering something that has been a vision of mine and Anna's for several years, if not the best part of half a decade. We see the value in the data capital that you guys will create as part of this program. We're creating new asset classes, and you are pioneers and leaders of this new economy that we're building. So I'm really excited to have you. I'm so excited to get to know some of you, hopefully on a more personal level over the next 9 weeks. And I'm excited to talk to you about one of my favorite topics, which is the value of data. So in this session, we're going to talk about what makes a data set valuable. I've developed a bit of a structured framework to think through how to evaluate the value of your ideas at this stage. And I've got some hacks to share with you at the end of this session. So make sure you tune in for the entire session to see those hacks for how to spot data opportunities in the market. So excited. Without further ado, let's just jump into it. One big disclaimer that I want to share at the start of this presentation is that what I'll be sharing with you are the opinions that I have based on my experience. I have worked in one of the largest data brokers in the world prior to coming to Vana. I've also worked on the sourcing side of things, doing human subjects research for one of the leading scientific institutions in the world. So this is my personal view on what value data has. The reason why I say that is because we're creating a new market here. The private data that we're going to be cultivating at Vana is traded behind closed doors today. So we're going to see market dynamics emerge as we start to create the public market for this data. And some of the stuff that I say today may not be relevant as we see some of this stuff emerge. So you are really at the bleeding edge of everything. Consider it kind of like when none of us are hopefully old enough to remember this, but when the first ever stock companies were created, people had no idea what stocks were. And now we trade them and we have derivatives on them and all these other instruments. So what's happening right now with data capitalization is very new. This is a very new market. And I'm here to just give you some offerings and some guidance as to how to think through the value of your data. And hopefully that will lead you in good stead as we navigate these uncharted waters today. So what I actually wanted to do was start off with a little bit of background. Some of you may not know about my story, so I wanted to kind of share with you how I became obsessed with human data. And it really has been an obsession. So in my younger days, I used to do a lot of policy and population studies. So studies about humans and the impact of certain interventions and programs on humans. So I was an advisor to the Prime Minister of a new country called Timor-Leste. It was the fourth newest country in the world. And my job, or part of it, was to track the national growth of the country using data. And then when I went to Harvard, I also researched for the Harvard Belfer Center, working on assessing the social impact for Fortune 500 companies. And that sounds pretty tangential to what we're doing today, but trust me, it's very relevant because all of these types of studies relied on me trying to gather as much data from humans as possible to work out quantitatively how their lives have changed. And so this is a picture of a field collection that I did when I was in Colombia. I was doing an impact study for Nespresso. They wanted to work out how much impact every dollar they were spending in their supply chain had on the humans that it touched. So I had to go to a bunch of farmers in rural Colombia, and I had to go and ask them how had their lives changed since Nespresso started buying their coffee beans. Again, really random and weird. The data collection itself was quite a challenge. I don't know if how many of you are familiar with agricultural communities, but they don't write a lot of stuff down. So going to them and saying, oh, you know, how has your life changed over the last 6 months? How has your spending habits changed? How has, you know, your travel and transport changed? They didn't really know. And so part of my obsession with big data actually came from a dinner that I was having when I was with my host family. And I was lamenting the fact that I didn't have any good data, and I was struggling to sketch out this model. And I saw my host mum, and she was constantly on her phone. And I said to her, hey Liz, what are you doing? And she said, I'm on Facebook. And I said, you're always on Facebook? And she's like, yes. And I'm like, what could you possibly be doing on Facebook? You're a rural farmer. What do you like about Facebook? She's like, oh, I post all the things that I buy for my kids. I buy a lot of things on Marketplace. I talk about the yield. I talk about the weather. And then boom, it hit me. I was like, oh my God, all of the data that I came here to collect, that I'm going around trying to get from farmers, is in this lady's Facebook. So I asked her, I said, can I please take a look at your Facebook? And she kindly showed me, and I went through and I had all of the data that I needed for my model. So rather than doing these, what you see on screen is, a 20 to 30 minute field collection, I then just changed my methodology around and just started walking around asking people to see their Facebooks. I was like, I just want to see a Facebook. I scrolled through and I was like, yep, the yield 10 months ago was this because she posted about it to her friends. Amazing. And so this started an obsession with thinking through, well, how much data is there on each of us in the world, and where does that power reside? Fast forward several years, and I ended up working at Appen. So Appen is, and you wouldn't be blamed if you don't know what Appen is and you've never heard of them. There is a select few companies in the world that buy, sell, and trade all of our private data. I joined Appen as the head of impact sourcing, and my job was to try to find data that large companies were struggling to get. So Appen's clients included Google. We did Google Ads, Google Search, Facebook Feed. We did GPT, Microsoft, Apple, and Amazon. So all of the big tech companies would source their data through brokers like Appen. There are very few of them in the world, but they control a large amount of the data collection and private data business. It is a massive business, can I just say. I didn't realize it until I started working in the industry, that it's a multi-billion-dollar business. Some of these large tech companies spend more on data than they do on engineers. That's how large and how big of an opportunity it is. But in these transactions that occur behind closed doors, there was very little participation from the people who actually created the data. You and me and the people that we know, we were outside of the transaction. And this is when I got really obsessed with thinking through how can we participate in this market? And generative AI picked up, and Anna and I were like, look, this is a huge problem, not only for people who create the data, the rightful users, the users who are the rightful owners of their data, but also for people who want to build technology with it. The fact that there was this bottleneck in the industry made this data very, very inaccessible for anybody who wanted to innovate and create new AI. And what I mean by that is there is a reason why our Facebook newsfeed uses such advanced technology, and yet we haven't cured cancer with AI. It's because of the economic system that drives the data into different products. And that's part of the mission of what Vana is about, to try to create a space where this data could be publicly traded so that we can start to imagine new technologies that can be created with our own data. So that's all a bit of background story about me, just to kind of give you a bit of context as to how I came to Vana and why I'm, I guess, somewhat qualified to speak about this topic. I know you're all here and you probably have data sets in mind, so I wanted to share with you one rubric that I use to assess the value of data. And this is my rubric. There are 6 points to consider when thinking through the value of data. Now, it's tough to value data in a closed market. As I mentioned, based on the experience that I've had at Appen, like a lot of these transactions happen behind closed doors. So a lot of it is quite theoretical at this stage because the public data market doesn't exist. We're creating it. But these are the principles that we applied in relation to data sourcing and data value in the industry. And I wanted to share them with you because they're a useful technique for you to think through how to value the data that you're considering. So I'm going to discuss each of these in turn, and we'll do a recap. As you have questions that come up, feel free to post them and we can answer them at the end. But start to think about these as they relate to the potential data set that you're thinking through. So the first principle to think through for your data set value is scarcity. Just like any supply and demand market, scarce data is valuable data. If it's out there in the world, it's probably not going to be super valuable. And the best illustration of this is private versus public data. So public data is stuff that you can scrape on the internet. It has become a very commoditized industry. What I mean by that is the ability to produce public data efficiently is based on the power of compute, not on any sourcing power and nothing related to the data itself, because you just need an efficient compute engine and you can scrape all of that data. Private data or platform data, on the other hand, is stuff that can be very, very valuable because it exists behind closed doors. So at the very extreme, if you want to think about scarcity, you can think about the dichotomy between public data, publicly available, versus private data, platform data, and you should be able to fall somewhere in between. Some really important signals of scarcity are, and these are kind of the yellow flags to look out for if you're thinking through a data set. If you're thinking through a data set from a platform and they've started to lock down their APIs, it's probably a sign that they see value in that data and they're creating scarcity in the market. They're trying to reduce the amount of data that they have that's public. We saw this with Reddit. We saw it with Twitter. If anybody has used the Twitter API since 2023, you'll know that it's like ridiculously expensive now. And then Spotify started to crack down on its developer API. Why? Because they're trying to create these scarce environments where they own all of the data. And when a platform is trying to restrict access, it's usually because they know the data is valuable. The trick is that data laws actually allow these collectives to bypass these scarcity walls. Individuals in most countries in the world have the right to reclaim the data from the platforms, and your jobs as leaders of these collectives is to help those individuals come together and structure their data so that they can almost crack through these walls and then come back together and create these fertile data gardens. So the question to ask yourself in the scarcity bucket is, how rare is your data? And consider that as it relates to your data set. The next thing you have to think about is depth. So when I think about data depth, I think about how much information one has in, we call it a row in the industry, but per entry. So like you have one, I guess, data point. How much information do you have within that data point? How many do you have chats, clicks, preferences, location, device info, time series logs of the same person? And that refers to the depth of a single data point. The more depth there is, the more optionality there is for training, personalization, and analytics. Depth enables multivariate modeling and better signal discovery. So let me try to illustrate that with a practical example. If I only had one of your chat messages, say on like Facebook, and I aggregated one message from every single person on this call, I could certainly understand some stuff about you, right? But if I got one message, if I got all your messages actually, if I got your feed, if I got your device, if I got your location, if I got your age, I have many potential ways that I could model out the relationships between these variables. And so the deeper the data set that you get across several people, the more valuable it could potentially is. So in this category, I'd like you to think through your schema. So that is the structure of your data, and ask yourself, how rich is your schema? How many different elements do you have in there about a single row or a single data point? The more elements that you have, the more likely it is that the data is valuable. The opposite, or I guess the adjacent problem to look through here is breadth. So breadth is the volume, diversity, and generalizability of your data. So that's how many people you have, how diverse that sample is, and how generalizable it is to that specific use case. And I'll tap into that, double click on that piece in a moment. But when I was at Appen, it was a very common word that was thrown around was quotas. So what would happen is somebody, like Facebook would be like, hey, I need 10,000 iMessage data points. And you'd be like, okay, sweet. And then as part of the contract, they'd say, but we want a certain percentage quota amongst this group, amongst this user, these types of users in this geography. Or, for a lot of visual data collection, it was, we need these categories of races or this type of skin color, and we need this number or percentage. For them, it was important because they were developing a product that was used by millions across a very diverse societal group. Narrow coverage is okay if your model is for a specific group. So example of that is like the Reddit data model that the Reddit data DAO created was specifically for Reddit shit posters. So it was okay that the sampling was a bit biased. But if you're looking at something that's supposed to be for society, if your data set is supposed to be broad enough to have a balanced view, it might be very important to make sure that the way that you're sourcing that data has breadth. So you're looking at diversity, you're looking at volume, you're looking at generalizability. It's the fundamental question here is how representative is your sample? And I'd add to that, how representative is it in relation to the use case? One of the tips, I have little tips laid in here. So this is like your little alpha. My little gift to you is, if breadth is an important part of your data set, consider dynamic pricing in your tokenomics so that somebody who is potentially a rarer person or somebody with a unique character trait might actually get more data, more token to encourage them to participate in your data set. Dynamic pricing here can be your friend. And I think we have different sessions to talk about tokenomics, but I'm just kind of layering in some tips here so that you can start to think through different elements of this. The next thing to think through is structure. Structure relates, for me, to your schema. For folks who aren't super familiar, when we look at data sets, the first thing that I always ask for is your schema. So basically, what's the structure of your data? What rows and columns do you have? What kind of operators are there in those rows and columns? So are they binary? Are they Boolean? Are they radial? Are they text? Are they numeric? Because that structure impacts my ability to be able to generate, to be able to use that data for a specific model. Usually, there is a stronger preference towards a really well-defined schema that's cleanly formatted and has limited noise. If you have a lot of randomness, if, for example, you're just getting a bunch of text data stored in a JSON file, it can be really hard to pass that out. It's unstructured data. Some people will be okay with using that, but some people don't want to go through the effort of thinking through, how do I structure that data to be able to use it in AI? The most common issues that I've seen that have really devalued data sets are where there's misaligned data types. So for example, where instead of using a numeric operator, you've classified a term as like a Boolean operator. You've got to make sure that the way that you've actually structured the data is consistent with the type of information that's coming in. And the other thing that really devalues the data structure is messy data. When you have a lot of null fields, it makes you question the validity of the data. So your proof of contribution here is very, very important to ensure that your data is very well structured. The question to ask around structure for yourself is, how clean is your data? I would actually say that I'm a little bit OCD, so a lot of my data sets tend to be very clean. Some people love data cleaning. I'm one of those people. Some people hate it. So this is something that you'll work through. I think there was a question here about, are you going to learn about this? You 100% are. This is part of the data refinement process, which I believe will be explained in technical workshops later on, which allows you to define that schema. So just keep this in mind, that the structure can be very, very important in terms of the value of the data set. The last piece to think, second last piece is timeliness. So some data sets age perfectly well. So there's a fantastic data DAO that exists on Vana right now, which is called Asterisk Data DAO. They are a women's non-reproductive health data DAO, and their mission is to try to advance medical intelligence for women, so advance medical treatment for women. Human bodies tend not to change as rapidly as, for example, sentiment on Twitter. So their data can age fairly okay. If you have a person's data point in that data set, it might be valid for several years, and some people might actually like to look at the time series data way back in relation to that data set. But there are other data sets where the timeliness of data matters a lot. and the value of the data decays really, really quickly. So you need to work out what type of timing is relevant to your data set given its potential use case, because timing goes to relevance, it goes to pattern visibility, and it goes to, if there is real-time inference that needs to be drawn from your data set, the power of that inference. There's an example of a data set that we're looking at right now where there's a partner that wants to measure real-time inflation. So inflation figures are published like monthly at best at some places. They want to do inflation figures, every hour. So for that, the updating of that data set needs to be very, very timely, hourly, in fact, for them to be able to gather any signal from it. So think through your data set as to how timely it needs to be in order to accrue value, because if you get this question wrong, you could have a really powerful data set like Twitter that's just really stale and therefore not very valuable. So you need to think through how relevant is your data over time. And my little tip here is your tokenomics. They really matter in this one. So if you've created tokenomics where somebody gets incentivized for doing one action and it requires subsequent actions for them, then you may not be getting a great data set here that is timely, depending on what your need is. So let me just concretize that for you all. If you wanted to get the Twitter data set from people and you give them a huge reward for connecting their Twitter and doing that little bit of a snapshot the first time, and no rewards for continuing to update their Twitter data, you might not have the best data set. So think about that in relation to your mechanics and your tokenomics, because that's what really matters here. The sixth and final, and I thank you for bearing with me, there are a lot of them, but the sixth and final thing to think about when it comes to data value is strategic utility. So this is actually a catch-all. It is, I put it last, but it's actually the most important thing. You can have a rich and structured data set, but if you can't squint and tell me how that data set actually solves a real world problem, it's not going to be commercial. It needs to somehow improve a model's performance. You need to be able to tell me a story of how it improves something, how it makes something more accurate, how it unlocks an insight, how it advances an AI model. So I'll give you a couple of examples. So there is currently not a data set out there that exists that is human movement, like a kinesthetic data set on human movement. And there's a lot of humanoid robots that people want to produce. So one can tell a story that if I collect human movement data, I might be able to improve humanoid robots. So you need to be able to tell a story kind of like that in relation to your data set. And if you can't, you should workshop it with us, workshop it with the team, so that we can kind of guide that story for you. If that story, the clarity of the utility of your data set is very, very important, because if you can't tell a story, it's highly likely that that data set may not be important. So the question to ask yourself in number 6 is, what does your data set unlock? You've got to have a very clear idea about what your data set unlocks. So quickly, just to recap: scarcity. Is your data set hard to access or replicate? Depth. How rich is your data set? Breadth. How diverse or representative is your contributor pool? Structure. Is your data clean? Is it labeled? Is it schema aligned? Timeliness. Is it current, relevant, and refreshed? And strategic utility. What problem or product does it power? That is the rubric through which I analyze data value when people ask me to. It's the rubric through which the industry also sees different data value. So I encourage you to apply this to some of your thoughts and use this to assess your data. Now, a presentation from Art wouldn't be complete with some hacks. I have cheat codes for you all because I'm the kind of guy who likes to optimize my life. I hope that the cheat codes will help you to either inspire you if you're kind of stuck on a data set, or will help you to get to your answer faster. So here are my cheat codes for understanding the value of data. My cheat code number 1, draw inferences from the limited public market. So there is a small public market for private data. It exists in niche places. It's not openly traded, but you can start to draw some parallels between your data set and some of these public markets. So look in data marketplaces like AWS Exchange, Snowflake, and Hugging Face, see what's popular or what's selling, and you can use this potentially as a proxy for your data set. I wouldn't feel too bad if your data set isn't listed here, because again, these are very infant marketplaces. But if you see, for example, I don't know, the Twitter data set from 2023 going for $100,000, you could probably bet that a Twitter data set from 2025 will go for a certain amount of money, right? So you can draw some parallels and inferences based on what you're seeing selling on these platforms. One that I mentioned earlier, see where platforms are locking down on privacy terms or API restrictions. Every single platform that I would say like 50% of the platforms, that was an exaggeration, every single, but about 50% of the platforms that I deal with on a day-to-day basis have given me revised terms of use and privacy policies in the last year, probably because they're locking down their data. So it's a yellow flag. Take a look at some of these restrictions, because that's probably a valuable data set there. This is another little hack. Appen, Scale AI, LXT, Data Strike. There is a small group of these kind of data brokers that kind of sit adjacent to data labelers that gather human data. And you can actually sign up to these platforms as somebody who's going to provide data to them. I'm signed up to all of these platforms. Why? Because it's interesting market intelligence as to what they're paying people to provide them. That's the kind of data that they're getting paid millions of dollars to provide to large tech companies. So I would encourage you, if you're a little bit lost, to sign up for Appen, Scale AI, LXT, Data Strike, and any of these kind of provide your data companies, just to see what kind of data they're asking from you, because that could be inspiration for data that then you can also put into the market. And then keep your ear to the ground for licensing deals. A lot of these licensing deals, they definitely were not public at the time that I was working in one of the data shops. They're becoming more and more public now. So set up a Google alert for data sale, data license, and pick up early some of these data licensing deals, because oftentimes they'll announce the deals, but the cycle of data collection takes months, if not years. So you could potentially front run a deal if you're able to crowdsource some of this data and then be able to sell it directly to the person who's on the other side of that deal. So that's my cheat code number one. Draw inferences from the limited public market if you're not quite sure what data you're wanting to aggregate yet. Cheat code number two for you all is to, and this is going to be controversial, step away from Web3 builders for a moment and go talk to some AI builders. Go and talk to people who are actually building some of the cutting edge technology, because so this group, this is from a website. It's called Build Club. They're the largest group of AI builders in Asia Pacific. They have 10,000 builders and 11,000 AI projects that have been shipped to date. I got involved with these guys pretty early on, and I absolutely love them, because when I posted in the Slack in this group, I was like, "What do you do if you can't find your data set on Kaggle?" Kaggle is an open source data set repository. They all had so many suggestions and ideas. So AI builders are some of the nicest, friendliest, best people. I mean, just like you guys, people that I've encountered, and they have plenty of data needs. So join your local AI hackathons. Stay involved in the AI building space, because that will lead you in great stead as to what's happening in the space and where the data demands are, because these guys usually can't access some of the big data sets that the large tech companies can, and they're reliant on open source data right now. The last thing is cheat code number three: use your industry instinct. So I'm not an industry expert in medical data. I'm not an industry expert when it comes to manufacturing data. I'm not an industry expert in even human movement, human subjects data. I'm really not, because I'm the person who gathers and provides the data for the industry. But I think some of the folks on this call, you come from a specific industry. You kind of have an inclination about what sucks in your industry, or an industry that you're well aware of. I think knowing what AI does not do well in your industry yet is a really nice entry point into asking why, and probably figuring out that in 90% of the instances, it's because they don't have enough data. So think through an industry that you're familiar with, what AI is doing in that industry and where it's capping off, because that's a really nice point of entry, and you probably are familiar with that data set. And I would encourage you for your first data set to be really familiar with it. So if it's coming from an industry that you're familiar with, that's even better. You'll be a great steward for collecting that data and bringing it to life. So a bonus cheat code for everyone here on the call is we'll share this slide link. Go to tiny.cc/Vana data bounty. This is a present to you all if you're stuck. We have a list of data sets that we have demand for. And if you're lacking inspiration and you want to use these data sets as the basis for your data, feel free to. This is our Vana data bounty board. Well, we regularly update it. There's a couple of data sets there now that people have picked up and are building. So if you're interested, take a look at this site. It's just a Notion dashboard. And email Sam at Vana Foundation or Muskin at Vana Foundation to discuss your interest in building any or all of these data DAOs. We give a little bit of context, but we can talk further about the requirements that some of the data clients have surfaced in relation to these data sets. Why I like them is because usually when there's one person that's interested in a data set, there are a lot of people that are interested in the data set. So that's really cool there. So that's my little gift to you. Go to the Vana data bounty board and see what other data sets there are. That's an additional Vana gift. So just a quick recap for everyone. That was a lot of info, and then I'm going to jump right into the questions. Use the dataset value rubric, scarcity, depth, breadth, structure, timeliness, and strategic utility to do an assessment of the dataset once you have one in mind. If you don't have one in mind, think practically. Look at some of the data marketplaces, look at where APIs are being restricted, and then look for some licensing signals. Get that Google alert up to try to work out where these licensing deals are, because that'll give you some indication of where data value resides. And lastly, you can find some inspo on the data bounty board or talking to the ecosystem team. Muskan and Ayush are fantastic. I know that they're somewhat new to this space, but they're catching up really quickly. So definitely lean on the team for some support as to what data set to build. Lastly, I want to say, I don't know if you've gathered, but I'm an absolute data nerd. I could talk about this for hours. This is a lot of fun for me, and I want it to be a lot of fun for you. Data is super fun because you get to learn and work out things that you never knew existed in the world. When I did that field collection in Colombia and was able to actually work out the impact of coffee on these farmers, it wasn't just my job. It was just insightful to see how people change over time. And I want you to have fun with the data that you're collecting. Make it interesting for you. And lastly, but not least, welcome to the family. Thank you so much for applying. Thank you so much for being with us. I'm so excited to have you on our journey, and I really do mean it. I want to get to know some of you and some of your projects.